When I finally found Vicky, she was leaning against the cold iron railing of the harbor bridge. Her dark hair whipped wildly across her face by the autumn wind. A cluster of empty beer bottles lay clinking softly at her feet. I pulled my coat tighter and sighed. The doctor was very clear, Vicky. You can't be drinking. She didn't look at me. Her eyes, bloodshot and heavy with liquor, stayed fixed on the dark, shimmering water below. I went to Adrian's office today, she said, her voice barely carrying over the wind. He was holding his new assistant against the mahogany desk, kissing her. She let out a ragged breath that turned to mist. There was a box of Durex sitting right next to his laptop. The funny thing is, I'm the one who bought them for him. A small, broken laugh escaped her throat. I stood beside her in silence for a long time, the chill of the iron railing seeping through my gloves. Vicky, I said softly, let him go. She turned her head slowly to look at me. And what about you, Nora? I froze. Marcus almost drove you to a nervous breakdown over Gemma, she whispered, her eyes sharp despite the drunkenness. Are you really going to stay married to him? Vicky always hated funerals. So we kept it small, no fanfare, no grand speeches, just a handful of people who actually cared under a gray, bruised sky. I stood beside her headstone long after the others had drifted away. When I finally turned to leave, I saw Marcus. He was leaning against the hood of his black SUV near the cemetery gates, his eyes fixed on me. What are you doing here? I asked, stopping a few feet away. Your assistant said you took the morning off, he said, his voice quiet. I guessed you'd be here with Vicky. I had a break between meetings, so I came to drive you back. I climbed into the passenger seat without a word. When he leaned across the console to pull my seatbelt down, I raised my hand, blocking his chest. I've got it. Marcus stilled. His dark eyes searched my face for a fraction of a second before he drew back, returning to his side of the car. He started the engine. You were gone before I woke up this morning. Why so early? I stared out the window at the passing rows of wet headstones. I didn't answer. He let the silence stretch for a block before trying again. I can assign a full-time driver to you. You've been leaving early and coming home late all week. I don't like you commuting alone. When the quiet between us stretched too thin, he suddenly reached over and gripped my forearm. His grip was tight, heavy with an edge of command. Nora, are you even listening to me? I turned my head to face him. I submitted my resignation this morning. I said evenly. The HR file should hit your desk by this afternoon. Just sign off on it when it gets there. He went rigid. The SUV swerved slightly before he hit the brakes, pulling the heavy car hard to the curb. Why? He demanded, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Is this still about what happened last month? 6 weeks ago, I slapped Gemma across the face. In response, Marcus suspended me from my role at the firm and locked me out of our brownstone. It was 10 at night when I tried to go home to get my things, only to be stopped at the wrought iron gate by our housekeeper, Mrs. Gable. She looked pained, her hands wringing her apron. Mr. Callahan said. He said this is his private property, ma'am. He instructed me not to let you in. Through the tall floor-to-ceiling windows of the parlor, I could see Marcus's broad, unyielding silhouette standing near the fireplace, his back to the street. A cold, sickening shame coiled in my gut, making me tremble from head to toe. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I turned on my heel and walked away into the dark. Earlier that afternoon, Gemma had walked into Marcus's executive suite wearing a bone-white silk midi dress. It was a piece from a limited runway collection that I had casually pointed out to Marcus months ago, telling him how much I loved it. I had tried through 3 different personal shoppers to track it down, to no avail. Yet there it was, draped over Gemma. Gemma was a former scholarship recipient Marcus had sponsored through college, our shared alma mater. Over the past year, her name had bled out of his corporate philanthropy files and into our actual lives. She didn't need an appointment to see him. Everyone in the executive suite knew her name. When I brought Marcus a box of pastries from a bakery across town, he would offhandedly remark, Gemma likes these too. Tell my assistant to leave a slice for her. When she complained that her campus apartment was too noisy to study for finals, Marcus instructed his team to secure a quiet, luxury studio for her nearby. When I confronted him back then, exhausted after months of silent displacement, he had simply pinched the bridge of his nose, exasperated. Why do you keep fixating on her, Nora? She's just a kid from a rough background with no family. Once you offer someone a hand, you see it through. I am sick to death of hearing about her, I had whispered. And now, he had taken the effort to hunt down the exact dress I wanted, only to give it to her. Gemma had stood in his office that afternoon, her eyes downcast, her voice small and trembling. Nora, Mr. Callahan was just being kind. He felt sorry for me. It doesn't mean anything else. Kind. I had laughed, the sound sharp and metallic. Does his kindness extend to funding your entire wardrobe? Are you a beggar? Is there anything you won't accept from him? Even street beggars have more pride than you. Nora, that's enough. Marcus had barked, stepping forcefully between us. His eyes were dark with anger as he leaned down, his voice a lethal whisper meant only for me. Look at yourself, he spat. The clothes on your back, the jewelry you wear, the lifestyle you live. Can you afford a single bit of it on your current salary? Even your position at my firm was something I handed to you. What right do you have to judge Gemma? I had stared at him, the air completely knocked out of my lungs. After Mrs. Gable turned me away at the gate that night, I walked down the dim residential streets with nowhere to go. The early autumn air cut straight through my thin coat. Marcus and I were childhood sweethearts. We grew up in the same country clubs, attended the same private galas. When my father's real estate empire collapsed into a messy, humiliating bankruptcy years ago, everyone whispered that Marcus would break off our engagement. Instead, on my 24th birthday, he rented out the top floor of the city's premier skyscraper. Surrounding us with our oldest friends, he got down on one knee. Nora, he had promised, holding my shaking hands. No matter what happens, I will always be your shield. I will love you forever. Now, standing in front of another woman, he had looked at me and asked what gave me the right to speak, when everything I had was merely his charity. My vision blurred. I reached up to wipe my cheeks, but the tears just kept coming, hot and fast. Then I heard the heavy, uneven footsteps behind me. I stiffened, realizing a man was tracking me down the quiet avenue. I quickened my pace, heading toward a brighter commercial street, but the footsteps broke into a run. Panic surged. I bolted, but in the dark, my heel caught on a crack in the pavement. I slammed hard onto the concrete. I scrambled back just as a glint of metal caught the streetlight. A man lunged at me with a pocket knife. Desperate, I grabbed a handful of loose asphalt gravel and hurled it into his face. The blade missed my ribs, slicing clean through my sleeve and deeply into my forearm instead. Someone shouted from across the street, headlight beams cut through the alley, and the attacker took off. The stranger called the police. At the station, bleeding and shivering under a thin blanket, I used the officer's phone to dial Marcus's private number. He answered on the third ring. His voice was cold, clipped, and devoid of warmth. Nora, I am only interested in hearing this call if you are ready to apologize to Gemma. Otherwise, I have nothing to say to you. I sat in the harsh fluorescent light of the precinct, the metallic smell of my own blood in the air. I understand, I whispered softly and hung up. I turned to the officer. My family isn't available. I'll take care of myself. After leaving the station, I went to a small boutique hotel nearby. I handed the clerk my credit card. He ran it, paused, and shook his head gently. I handed him another. Then another. I'm sorry, ma'am, the clerk said, his eyes shifting from professional to pitying. None of these are going through. Marcus had frozen all my accounts. A terrible, hysterical laugh bubbled up in my chest. He was right, wasn't he? Without him, I was nothing. Just another person relying on his mercy. The next morning, I walked into a luxury consignment shop and sold the designer handbag off my shoulder for $200 cash. I went to an urgent care clinic to get 6 stitches in my forearm. The nurse warned me it would leave a faint, silver scar, and then checked into a shabby, $80 a night motel at the edge of the city. I walked into the small room, shut the door, and lay down on the thin mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling. I stayed in that tiny, decaying room for 10 days. Except for popping down to the corner bodega to buy bread and bottled water, I never left. No money, no polished life, no prestige, no Marcus. On the 11th morning, heavy, frantic footsteps echoed down the exterior corridor. Someone banged furiously on the hollow wooden door. Nora, are you in there? The door swung open. The motel manager stood outside with a master key, and behind him stood Marcus. He looked disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his jaw rough with stubble. He rushed in and threw his arms around me where I sat quietly on the edge of the unmade bed, pulling me into a grip so tight it hurt. Why was your phone off? He breathed, his voice raw, buried in my neck. Do you have any idea how long I've been looking for you? Why are you so damn stubborn? You'd rather rot in a place like this than just bend your head to me. He pulled back, his hands framing my face, his eyes wild with panic. Do you know what went through my head when I finally found out you were mugged? Jesus, Nor. I'm sorry, okay? It's my fault. Just come home. I slowly turned my head, looking past his shoulder into the dusty mirror above the dresser. There was Marcus Callahan, immaculate and desperate. And there was Nora Hayes, pale, hollowed out, and completely still. The nurse had been right about the scar on my arm. It was going to stay. The flashback dissolved as Marcus's car idling at the curb brought me back to the present. I gently untangled my hand from his grip. I just want to take some time off, I said, my voice flat, devoid of any edge. I need to handle Vicky's estate. Marcus studied my face for a long moment, searching for a spark of anger, a hint of leverage. Finding none, his throat worked silently before he rasped. Okay. Back at the corporate tower, I took my signed resignation form and knocked on his office door. Come in, he called out. When he saw me, he paused. Since when do you knock on my door, Nora? I didn't engage. I walked forward and set the document on his mahogany desk. As I did, My gaze caught on the ceramic mug sitting beside his laptop. It had a hand-painted sketch of a ballerina on it. Gemma's prize from a university dance showcase, which she had gifted to Marcus as a token of gratitude. There had been a matching pen, too. The first time I saw it on his desk weeks ago, I had thrown it directly into the trash. We had fought viciously that night. "Are you ever going to stop this?" Marcus had shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. "It's a harmless gift from a young girl. Must you be so pathological? She looks up to me as a benefactor, Nora. Is your own mind so filthy that you see filth in everyone else?" I remembered how the air had left my lungs that night, how I felt like I was drowning in shallow water. After he slammed the front door and drove off, I had slumped against the hallway wall, sobbing until my ribs ached. Noticing where I was looking, Marcus frowned quickly, his hand moving to cover the mug. My assistant must have grabbed the wrong cup from the break room. "It's cute," I said suddenly. Marcus blinked, stunned. "What? The mug? It's cute." I retracted my hand and pushed the paper a fraction closer to him. "Please sign." He stared at me, his mouth set in a tight, uneasy line. Slowly, he picked up a pen and executed his signature. "My assistant told me something," Marcus said casually, though his eyes never left mine. "The black card I gave you after I brought you back. You haven't spent a dime of it. The balance hasn't moved." That day he brought me home from the motel. His fingers had lingered softly over the fresh stitches on my arm. He told me he had unfrozen all my personal accounts and handed me a new, unrestricted black card, promising he would never touch my finances again. I had held the heavy metal card between two fingers, looked at it for a moment, and tossed it into the back of a nightstand drawer. I looked at him now. I didn't have anything I needed to buy. His jaw tightened, a dark shadow passing over his features. "I'll drive you home after work," he said abruptly. Ever since the motel, he had developed an almost obsessive need to keep tabs on me. If I was out of his line of sight for more than a few hours, his calls would start. It was as if he believed that the moment he turned his back, I would vanish into thin air again. I touched the faint silver line under my sweater sleeve. "Fine." He dropped me off at the house, explaining he had an executive dinner with Prospective Arts Foundation donors, and wouldn't be staying. I waved him off without looking back and walked inside. Mrs. Gable mentioned that Marcus had requested a heavy, comforting beef stew for my dinner. I looked at the steaming pot on the stove, said nothing, and simply pulled a pre-packaged turkey sandwich from the fridge. I heated it in the microwave, walked up to my room and shut the door. Before turning off the lights, I opened my phone and scrolled through social media. Gemma had posted an update 10 minutes prior. "So grateful to the person who is always clearing the path ahead for me." The attached photo showed a candlelit table at an elite steakhouse. In the corner of the frame was a man's forearm, a crystal whiskey glass held in a long-fingered hand wearing a distinctive platinum watch. It was Marcus. Gemma was graduating in a few months. She wanted Marcus to leverage his connections to secure her a principal dancer spot at the nation's top ballet theater. Tonight's dinner was clearly with the theater's board chairman. I remembered when my father's company was falling apart years ago. My father had desperately asked Marcus to introduce him to the CEO of a global investment firm, hoping for a restructuring loan. Marcus had refused him, cold and direct. "Your father's business model is outdated, Nora. Using my personal capital or reputation to force a meeting won't yield a return. It's a bad investment." My proud, dignified father had stood there, his face flushing with a terrible, crushed humiliation, stuttering, "Oh, of course, Marcus. You're right. Business is business." I had almost screamed at Marcus that night. But as we walked out, my father grabbed my arm, whispering, "Don't fight with him, Nora. Marcus doesn't like pulling favors for people. Besides, he's right. It wouldn't have saved us." A few weeks later, my family filed for Chapter 11. And now, because Gemma expressed a wish, Marcus was investing millions into an entertainment sector he had never previously touched, throwing private dinners just to hand a mediocre college dancer a golden ticket. I closed the app, locked my phone, and tossed it onto the nightstand. An hour later, the bedroom door opened. Marcus walked in, reeking of expensive scotch. He leaned against the doorframe, his dark eyes fixated on me with an unsettling, intense focus. I pulled the duvet up, preparing to sleep. In 2 quick strides, he was beside the bed, his fingers clamping down around my wrist. I turned my head. "What is it?" "Nora." His voice was thick with alcohol, raspy and low. "You used to always have a hot tonic waiting for me when I came home late after drinking." I gave a slight pull against his grip. "I forgot. There's hangover medication in the vanity drawer downstairs. Go grab some if your head hurts." He didn't move. His grip tightened until the bone pressed against bone. When I winced and muttered that he was hurting me, he released me instantly, as if burned. He straightened up, smoothing his jacket with trembling fingers. "Go to sleep," he said softly, his voice strained. "Tomorrow is the university alumni gala. We're going together." The annual alumni gala of the St. Jude endowment was held in the grand conservatory of the university, a soaring, 19th-century cathedral of ribbed, cast iron and frosted glass that smelled faintly of damp earth, winter jasmine, and very old money. Marcus's chauffeur held the umbrella as I stepped from the car onto the wet, bluestone terrace. The rain had picked up after sunset, turning the autumn leaves into a slick, amber mulch beneath our feet. Marcus adjusted the lapel of his tailored tuxedo, his broad frame cutting an imposing line against the backdrop of limestone pillars. He reached down, catching my fingers in his. His palm was warm, dry, and slightly rough at the base of the thumb where his signet ring sat. "You look beautiful, Nora," he murmured, his thumb brushing the inner skin of my wrist, lingering, as it always did now, right above the faint, raised silver scar, hidden beneath my crepe sleeve. "Thank you," I said. My dress was black velvet, cut square at the collarbones with long fitted sleeves that completely covered my arms to the knuckles. It was a gown I had bought 3 years ago for an opera benefit in Vienna. It bore no labels that Marcus had purchased for me. It belonged to the year before my father's bankruptcy had been finalized. As we walked through the double mahogany doors into the chandelier-lit rotunda, heads turned. The Callahan name carried the weight of 4 generations of venture capital and state governorships. Beside him, I had spent 10 years playing the graceful, quiet counterpart, the childhood sweetheart whose fallen family name was overlooked because Marcus had chosen to keep her on his arm. "Marcus. Nora. Over here." Julian Bradley, a senior partner at Marcus's firm, waved us toward a high cocktail table where several university trustees were gathered. Julian's wife, Claire, kissed both my cheeks with the cool, scented air of someone performing a civic duty. "We heard about Vicky," Claire whispered, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder. "Darling, I am so dreadfully sorry. Have you been taking care of yourself? You look so thin." "I am fine, Claire. Thank you." "Adrian is already in St. Moritz," Julian muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "Barely 48 hours after the funeral, and he's already entertaining the Japanese consortium. Unforgivable." Marcus took a glass of vintage champagne from a silver tray and handed it to me. "Nora handled the arrangements. She needs to rest now. I'm thinking of taking her to the coast for a few weeks once the fiscal audits close." He spoke as if I were a delicate convalescent, a bird whose wing had been broken by an unfortunate gust of wind, currently recuperating under the benevolent shade of his roof. I held the crystal flute between 2 fingers, letting the cold bubbles rise against the glass, but I did not bring it to my lips. Before Julian could answer, the room fell into a polite, expectant murmur. The string quartet near the marble dais began playing the overture to Giselle. At the top of the grand staircase, Dean Holloway stepped up to the microphone, his tuxedo straining against his belly. "Distinguished alumni, honored guests." The dean's voice boomed over the discreet sound system. "Tonight we celebrate not only our institution's storied past, but the extraordinary artistic talents nurtured by our endowed scholarships. Through the magnificent generosity of the Callahan Foundation, we are proud to introduce the newest apprentice soloist of the National Ballet Company, Miss Gemma Ross." The applause was polite, wealthy, and uniform. Gemma descended the marble steps. She was dressed in a gown of pale, iridescent tulle that caught the chandelier light like sea foam. Her hair was swept into an immaculate, tight chignon, accentuating the fragile curve of her pale throat and the exquisite, bird-like hollows beneath her collarbones. Around her neck sat a platinum pendant, a teardrop sapphire encircled by micropave diamonds. I knew that necklace. It had belonged to Marcus's grandmother. For 70 years, it had sat in the Callahan family vault at Northern Trust. When we were engaged, Marcus had taken me to the vault, held the velvet box in his hands, and said, "My mother wanted me to save this for our 10th anniversary, Nora. It belongs to the woman who stands beside me through everything." 10 years were not yet up. We were only in our 5th year of marriage. Yet there it hung, glowing against the pale, unblemished chest of a 22-year-old dancer. Beside me, Marcus did not move, but I felt the shift in his posture, the instantaneous, imperceptible tightening of his trapezoids, the sudden halt in his respiration. He looked at the necklace. Then with a slow creeping dread his gaze snapped down to me. I stood there, looking up at the staircase. My face did not flush. My fingers did not tighten around the stem of my champagne glass. My eyes remained as still and flat as the water beneath the harbor bridge on the night Vicky died. "Nora," Marcus whispered, his voice dropping into a register so low and strained, it was almost swallowed by the violin strings. "The necklace, the foundation, loaned a collection of estate jewelry for the Arts Gala's archival display. The trustees selected the pieces. I did not. She wears it well," I said. Marcus froze. "What?" "The sapphire," I said, turning my head to meet his eyes. My voice was conversational, light, carrying the mild, disinterested appraisal of a stranger. Reviewing a painting in a hotel lobby. The blue complements her skin tone. Your grandmother had very pale skin too, didn't she? It suits her. Marcus's throat worked in a dry, convulsive swallow. The color drained from his lips, leaving them a faint, grayish purple. He had braced himself for a scene. He had prepared for the hissed accusations in the car, the broken crystal on the brownstone floor, the tearful demands that he choose between his wife and his charity project. He knew how to handle my anger. He would meet it with cold condescension, lock me out of his bank accounts, until I apologized, and then bring me back home under the guise of an all-forgiving savior. He did not know what to do with my praise. Gemma reached the bottom of the steps. Several elderly trustees clustered around her, patting her hands, praising her grace. Within minutes, her eyes scanned the perimeter of the ballroom, found Marcus, and lit up with that practiced, wide-eyed innocence that had cost my father his company and me 6 weeks of my sanity. She excused herself from the donors and glided toward us, her silk skirts whispering against the parquet. "Mr. Callahan," she said, dipping her chin in a modest, elegant half-curtsy. "Dean Holloway said you might not make it tonight because of your board meetings. I'm so glad you came." Then her gaze flicked to me. Her lower lip gave a tiny, imperceptible quiver, the exact performance of a frightened lamb encountering a wolf. "Nora," she whispered, taking a cautious half-step back, as if afraid I might raise my hand to her again. I hope you don't mind me wearing the foundation piece tonight. The curator insisted it went with the costume themes. If it makes you uncomfortable, I can take it off right now." Her slender fingers reached for the clasp at the back of her neck, fumbling with theatrical distress. Around us, Claire and Julian watched from the corner of their eyes. 6 weeks ago, I would have stripped that necklace from her throat and thrown it into the fountain. 6 weeks ago, I would have demanded Marcus take it back. Right then and there. Tonight, I simply set my champagne glass down on a passing waiter's silver tray. "Keep it on, Gemma," I said gently. "It's only metal and stone. If it helps you secure your soloist contract with the board chairman tonight, you should make the most of it." Gemma's hands froze on the clasp. Her eyes widened, darting between Marcus and me, searching for the trap. She was accustomed to my rage. My rage was the fuel that allowed her to look small, helpless, and noble in Marcus's eyes. Deprived of my anger, she looked like an overdressed undergraduate standing in a room full of middle-aged vultures. "I thank you, Nora," she stammered, her voice losing its melodic cadence. "Excuse us," Marcus said abruptly. He did not wait for Gemma to reply. He grabbed my elbow, his grip uncomfortably tight through the velvet sleeve, and steered me forcefully away from the cocktail circle, toward the quiet glass corridor leading to the conservatory's botanical wing. The corridor was dimly lit, surrounded on both sides by towering potted palms and trailing orchids. The air smelled of damp peat moss and cold rain hitting the glass roof above. Marcus released my arm and spun around, blocking the narrow path. "What was that?" he demanded, his breath coming hard and fast. I smoothed the velvet of my sleeve where his fingers had creased the fabric. "What was what, Marcus? Don't play dumb with me, Nora." His voice was a harsh, suppressed rasp echoing off the iron ribs of the greenhouse. "You didn't care about the dress. You didn't care about the mug. Now she's wearing my family's heirloom necklace in front of 200 people, and you tell her it looks nice. Would you prefer I slapped her again?" I asked, looking up into his dark, furious eyes. "Should I scream? Should I make a scene so you can have security? Drag me out to the parking lot and leave me in the rain again?" Marcus flinched as if a whip had cracked against his cheekbone. "Nora, that's not what I meant," he stammered, reaching out to touch my face. I stepped back half an inch. His hand remained suspended in the empty air between us, his fingers trembling slightly before curling into a fist. "I didn't mean for you to be hurt that night," Marcus said, his voice dropping into that desperate, frantic register from the motel room. "I told the security desk to hold you at the gate because I wanted you to calm down. I thought you'd go to your sister's house or to a hotel. How was I supposed to know you'd walk down the avenue alone? How was I supposed to know some junkie with a knife was?" "You didn't know," I agreed softly. "And when I called you from the police station, bleeding through an industrial bandage, you told me not to speak to you unless I was ready to apologize to Gemma. I thought you were lying." He roared, then instantly clamped his jaw shut, glancing back toward the ballroom doors. He leaned in, his eyes bloodshot, his chest heaving against his cummerbund. "You had spent 4 months accusing me of sleeping with her, accusing her of stealing from our kitchen, making up stories about her looking at my schedule. I thought you were just staging another crisis to force my hand." "I know," I said. The silence that followed was terrifying. Marcus stared at me. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall, an athlete in college, a titan in corporate litigation who had dismantled multi-billion-dollar conglomerates without breaking a sweat. Yet looking at my unblinking, tranquil expression, he looked completely defenseless. "Why aren't you yelling at me?" he whispered, his voice cracking down the center. "Nora, please. Just yell at me. Call me a bastard. Tell me I'm a piece of shit. Throw something." "Why would I do that?" I asked. "Anger is an attempt to change an outcome, Marcus. It requires an expectation that the other person is capable of being something different." I reached up and gently straightened the lapel of his tuxedo. "You are Marcus Callahan. You protect what is weak when it flatters your vanity, and you discard what is broken when it demands your accountability. You gave my father's life's work to the bankruptcy court because you found his failure distasteful, and you gave your grandmother's sapphire to a 22-year-old dancer because she looks at you like you are a god." I let my hand drop back to my side. "You have been entirely consistent, Marcus. It would be very childish of me to be angry at someone for being exactly who they are." Marcus reached out, his hand clutching the velvet of my shoulder with a grip so violent it tore the inner seam of the lining. "Stop it. Stop talking like you're already gone." "I am already gone, Marcus," I said. "You just haven't received the paperwork yet." He let go of me as if my shoulder were red-hot iron. He backed away 2 paces, his eyes wild, his chest heaving. "You can't leave me. You have no money. You resigned from the firm. Your father's estate is tied up in 5 more years of creditor litigation. Where the hell are you going to go?" "That," I said, offering him a small, polite corporate smile, "is no longer your department." I turned on my heel and walked back through the glass corridor toward the main ballroom. Behind me, the sound of Marcus's heavy, uneven breathing was drowned out by the rain drumming against the skylights. The next morning at precisely 9 o'clock, I met with Vicky's probate attorney Simon Vance, in a small, paneled office overlooking the river docks. Simon was 70, with ink-stained fingers, gold wire-rimmed spectacles and the dry, cynical demeanor of a man who had spent 40 years reading the wills of wealthy sociopaths. He set a steaming ceramic mug of black coffee before me, accompanied by a thick, ribbon-tied folder of parchment documents. "Victoria left everything to you, Nora," Simon said, sliding the folder across the green leather blotter. Her husband, Adrian, was entirely disinherited under the codicil signed 3 weeks before her death. I looked down at the ribbon. "What does everything mean, Simon?" Simon opened his ledger. "The brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, fully unencumbered. The family vineyard in Sonoma County, currently leased to an organic cooperative generating roughly $400,000 in annual net royalties. And her 40% non-voting equity in the Vance Mercer design agency." He took off his glasses and looked at me over the rims. "In total, liquid and fixed assets amount to approximately $14 million after estate taxes." Victoria's instructions were very specific. He pulled a single sheet of creamy, deckle-edged stationery from the inner pocket of the file and handed it to me. The handwriting was unmistakably Vicky's, bold, slightly slanted with the exaggerated loops she always used when she had had 2 martinis before lunch. "Nora, if you're reading this in Simon's office, it means I finally managed to escape Adrian's pathetic little theater. Don't be sad. I was tired and the harbor bridge was very cold. I know what Marcus is doing to you. I saw it before you did. Men like Marcus and Adrian don't marry women, they collect mirrors. When the mirror gets a crack in it, they don't fix the glass, they find a cheaper, younger piece of foil to reflect their magnificent egos back to them. You spent 10 years being Marcus's good girl. You watched your father bleed out in court because you didn't want to embarrass the Callahans. You let them treat your grief like bad manners. Take the money. Take the house. Sell the vineyard if you hate wine, burn the design firm if you hate fabric, but get the hell out of that brownstone. Don't be a martyr, Nora. It's a very boring role, and the pay is terrible. With all my love. V. I held the paper between my thumb and forefinger for a long time. The ink was dry. The paper smelled of the sandalwood perfume Vicky had worn since our sophomore year in college. I did not cry. I had cried all my tears onto the $80 mattress at the edge of the city while my forearm bled through its gauze. I folded the paper carefully, slid it into my coat pocket, and looked up at Simon. "Can the asset transfers be executed without notifying Marcus's banking group?" I asked. Simon smiled, a thin predatory slit of white teeth. "Victoria anticipated that. All funds have been routed through an independent custodial trust in Delaware. Marcus Callahan's forensic accountants couldn't find a penny of this even if they had a federal subpoena." "Good," I said, opening my purse and pulling out a blue leather folder. "Now, let's discuss the divorce filings." The confrontation at the brownstone occurred 3 days later, on a freezing Thursday evening. I had spent the afternoon packing 3 suitcases. I took only what I had brought into the marriage. My mother's silver hairbrush. My sketchbooks from university. My winter coats purchased before my father's bankruptcy, and the collection of first edition poetry books my father had given me for my 16th birthday. Every diamond Marcus had bought me was lined up in their velvet boxes on the mahogany dresser in the master suite. The black American Express card sat on the glass vanity table, cut clean in half, with kitchen shears. The front door opened downstairs at 6:15. Footsteps hurried up the grand spiral staircase, not Marcus's measured, heavy tread, but the light, rapid clicking of high-heeled boots. Gemma stood in the bedroom doorway. She was wearing a long, camel hair coat, the one Marcus had bought her from the boutique on Madison Avenue 2 weeks ago, and her cheeks were flushed pink from the wind. In her hand, she carried a velvet-lined box containing the Callahan sapphire necklace. When she saw the open suitcases on the bed, her breath hitched in theatrical. "Shaw, Nora," she breathed, taking a step inside, her hand clutching the velvet box to her chest. "What are you doing? Are you moving out?" I continued, folding a dark woolen sweater, placing it neatly into the corner of the leather trunk. "Mrs. Gable should have told you that Marcus is at his Midtown Athletic Club until 8. If you're here to return the necklace, leave it on the dresser." Gemma didn't move toward the dresser. Instead, she stepped closer to the bed, her eyes filling with large, luminous tears that hovered on her lower lashes. Without falling, "Nora, please don't do this," she pleaded, her voice trembling with a delicate, fragile despair. "Mr. Callahan came to my rehearsal hall this morning. He was furious. He took the necklace back, he canceled my contract review with the board, and he told me I was never allowed to step foot in his office again." She took another step, dropping onto her knees beside my suitcase, reaching out to grasp the hem of my coat. "It's my fault, isn't it? Because I wore the necklace to the gala? Nora, I swear to God, I never wanted to come between you and Mr. Callahan. He was just my sponsor. He was like an older brother to me. When my mother died, he was the only one who paid my hospital bills. I was just so grateful to him." I stopped folding. I looked down at her where she knelt on the antique Persian rug. She was 22. She had a face that looked like an angel painted on a church ceiling, soft, doe-eyed, completely innocent. "Gemma," I said, my voice quiet and calm, "get up off the floor." "No," she sobbed, clutching my coat tighter. "Not until you tell me you won't leave him. If you leave him because of me, he will hate me forever. He will ruin my career. You have to tell him that I'm innocent. You have to tell him you forgive us." I looked at the doorway. The floorboard near the hall sconce gave a faint, familiar creak. Marcus stood in the shadow of the doorway. He was still wearing his charcoal overcoat, his briefcase in hand, his face pale and frozen as he watched the scene before him. He had arrived early. Gemma had known he was coming. She had timed her entrance, down to the very minute. She had expected me to scream at her, to yank my coat from her hands, to call her a parasite, so that Marcus could walk in, see his precious, fragile scholarship girl being abused by his bitter wife, and step in to save the day once again. I didn't pull my coat away. I reached down, took Gemma's wrists in my hands, and gently, firmly peeled her fingers from my fabric. "Gemma," I said, my voice carrying clearly into the hallway, "you don't need to perform for me. There are no donors here." Gemma blinked through her tears, confused by my lack of resistance. "You took the apartment because you didn't want to live in the dorms," I said, reciting each fact with the flat, clinical accuracy of an inventory clerk. "You took the dresses because you wanted to look like the girls whose fathers owned hedge funds. You took Marcus's time because you knew an executive's vanity is the easiest lock in the world to pick." I leaned down slightly, looking into her widening pupils. "And you're kneeling on this rug right now because you realize that without the scandal of being the other woman, you are simply a mediocre dancer with a scholarship that expires in May." Gemma's breath caught in her throat. The tears on her cheeks dried instantly. The helpless, trembling child vanished, replaced by the hard, sharp, calculating creature that lived beneath the tool. "You think you're so superior, don't you?" Gemma hissed, her voice dropping into a vicious, ugly whisper that didn't sound like a ballerina at all. "You think, because your daddy had a yacht 20 years ago, you're better than me? Look at you. You're 30 years old, your father is a bankrupt felon, and your husband bought you off like a charity case. At least Marcus looks at me when I walk into a room. He hasn't touched you in a year." From the doorway, Marcus let out a sound, a low, strangled, animal gasp. Gemma's head snapped toward the door. When she saw Marcus standing there, the blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. Mr. Callahan." Gemma stammered, scrambling to her feet, her hands flying to her mouth. I didn't mean She was provoking me. Marcus didn't look at her. He didn't scream. He didn't roar. He walked into the room, his eyes fixed entirely on me, stepping past Gemma as if she were a piece of discarded cardboard in an alleyway. "Get out, Gemma," Marcus said. His voice was dead. "Marcus, please listen to me. If you are not off this property in 60 seconds, Marcus said, not turning his head, "I will have the university revoke your degree for ethical fraud, and I will ensure you never dance on a public stage in North America again. Get out." Gemma stood frozen for 3 seconds. Then, realizing that the golden well had run completely dry, she spun around and fled down the stairs, her boots clattering wildly against the marble steps until the front door slammed shut. Below, the brownstone went dead quiet. Marcus stood between the bed and the door. His eyes swept over the open suitcases, the empty closet doors, the bare vanity table where all his gifts lay in neat, glittering rows. "Nora," he said. His voice was hoarse, shredded at the edges. "I heard her. I heard everything she said." "I know," I said, zipping the first leather suitcase. "I was blind," he said, taking a staggering step toward me. He reached out, his hands trembling violently, trying to grasp my shoulders. "I swear to God, Nora, I was an idiot. I thought she was someone who needed help. I thought you were just being insecure because of your father's bankruptcy. I wanted to prove to you that I was strong enough to protect everyone." "You didn't protect me, Marcus," I said. He fell to his knees on the Persian rug, the exact spot where Gemma had knelt 3 minutes earlier. Marcus Callahan, the man whose grandfather had built the city's financial center, buried his face in the woolen fabric of my skirt, his broad shoulders shaking with long, violent, racking sobs. "Don't leave me," he wept into my lap, his hands clutching my knees like a child, begging for mercy in the dark. "Nora, please. I'll sell the firm. We'll move to Europe. I'll buy back your father's estate in the Hamptons. Every single acre. I'll put it all in your name. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. Just don't leave this house." I looked down at the top of his head. I saw the fine, dark hair I had stroked through 10 years of board meetings, political campaigns, and hospital visits. I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No triumph. No vindictive joy. Only the cold, heavy realization that love, once it has been starved to death in the dark, cannot be revived by tears. "Marcus," I said softly. He lifted his head, his face wet, his eyes bloodshot and swollen, looking at me with a desperate, pathetic hope. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a white, legal-sized envelope. I laid it gently on the crown of his dark hair, letting it slide down into his hands. "The petition for dissolution of marriage," I said. "Simon Vance has already filed the electronic notice with the county clerk. I have waived all claims to alimony, all claims to the Callahan Trust, and all equity in the firm." Marcus looked down at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. "I won't sign. I will fight it in every court in the state. I have 50 litigators on retainer, Nora. You can't divorce me if I don't agree." "You will sign it, Marcus," I said calmly. "Why?" he choked out. "Why would I ever sign this?" "Because," I said, picking up the handles of my 2 suitcases, "if you contest this divorce, Simon Vance will submit the complete financial records of your private charitable foundation to the Internal Revenue Service." Marcus's breath stopped. "The $400,000 you routed through the Arts Endowment to pay for Gemma's luxury lease," I said, stepping around him toward the door. "The offshore wire transfers from your grandfather's trust that were categorized as educational grants. It's all in the Delaware archive, Marcus. Simon has 3 copies in 3 different jurisdictions." I paused at the threshold of the bedroom, turning back to look at him one last time. He was still on his knees, clutching the white envelope to his chest, staring at me as if the universe had just collapsed into a black hole. "Sign the papers, Marcus," I said. "Keep your money. Keep your tower. Keep your family's precious name." "And what do you get?" he screamed, his voice breaking into a ragged, bleeding sob. "What the hell do you get out of this, Nora?" I looked at the doorway, then down the grand spiral staircase toward the open front door where the cold autumn wind was blowing in, smelling of rain and the wide open sea. "I get to be Nora Hayes again," I said. I walked down the stairs, out into the rain, and did not look back. 6 months later, spring arrived in Sonoma County. The morning sun rose over the rolling hills of the Russian River Valley, burning the mist off the green rows of Cabernet Sauvignon vines. The air smelled of wild rosemary, moist loam, and the distant, crisp salt of the Pacific Ocean 20 miles to the west. I sat on the wide, wraparound porch of the vineyard farmhouse Vicky had left me. I wore an oversized linen shirt, faded denim jeans, and a pair of leather gardening boots caked in red clay. My hair was tied loosely with a silk ribbon. On the cedar table beside me sat a sketchpad filled with architectural renderings for the Vance Mercer Agency's new textile line, a bowl of fresh cherries, and a cup of black coffee. My right forearm rested on the sun-warmed cedar. The scar was still there, a thin pale line of silver cutting across the tan skin of my wrist. But it no longer felt cold when the weather changed. It was just a seam where the old life had ended, and the new one had been sewn together. A gravel crunch echoed from the driveway. Simon Vance walked up the porch steps, carrying a leather briefcase and a warm bakery box smelling of cinnamon rolls. "Good morning, Nora," Simon said, setting the box on the table and collapsing into the wicker armchair with a sigh of old bones. "Good morning, Simon. How was the drive from the city?" "Tolerable. Traffic near the Golden Gate was an abomination as usual." He pulled a thick blue-backed document from his briefcase and laid it beside my coffee cup. Stamped across the front in red ink was, "Final Decree of Absolute Dissolution." At the bottom of the page, beneath the judge's seal, was Marcus's signature. The penmanship was shaky, irregular, the ink pressed so hard into the parchment that it had nearly torn the fiber. "He signed it yesterday afternoon," Simon said, taking a cherry from the bowl. "His lead attorney told me Marcus hasn't been into the Midtown office in 3 months. He spends his days at the country club in Greenwich drinking 18-year-old scotch and staring at the tennis courts." I picked up the decree. I looked at the names, Marcus Callahan and Nora Hayes. 2 legal entities that had circled each other for 20 years, reduced to 12 pages of boilerplate, statutory text and a county court stamp. I didn't feel a surge of grief. I didn't feel a rush of anger. I simply felt the vast, quiet space of a morning that belonged entirely to me. "And Gemma?" I asked, setting the paper down. "Departed for Munich last month," Simon said dryly. "Joined a secondary regional troupe in Bavaria. No solo parts. No patron. Paying her own rent in a shared flat with 3 other dancers." I picked up my pen and signed my name on the confirmation line. Nora Hayes. Simon took the document, blew lightly on the ink, and slipped it back into his briefcase. He looked at me over his gold wire-rimmed glasses, a rare, soft smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Victoria would be very proud of this porch, Nora. Victoria would tell me the coffee is too weak and ask why I haven't opened a bottle of Riesling before noon," I said. Simon let out a short, dry chuckle. "Quite right. She certainly would." He stood up, tipped his hat, and walked back down the porch steps to his car. I sat on the porch for a long time after the dust from his sedan had settled back into the gravel lane. The wind moved through the valley, rustling the young grape leaves, carrying the warmth of the midday sun across the hills. Down in the orchard, the wild plum trees were dropping their white petals onto the green grass like confetti from a celebration that had ended long ago. I picked up my charcoal pencil. I turned to a fresh, white page in my sketchbook, looked out at the horizon, where the blue sky met the dark green line of the redwoods, and began to draw.